So in this video, I want to talk about how to defy the Ruski Mir. So the Ruski Mir is the Russian world. But before I talk about that, I want to say this. I was in bed last night and something clicked. I had this this idea, and I thought, I got to share that in the video tomorrow. And it was really the connection of a number of thoughts coming together. But it started with this. How could the average person defy the Ruski Mir? The Ruski Mir is the Russian world, and it means something politically, but it means something culturally. For Russians, it means, that Russia is kind of dominant, at least within the region, preferably in the world. For the world, it means that the world absorbs more of that which Russia is doing. And to a Russian mind, it's a good thing. To the rest of us, it's not so much a good thing. Okay, so my first question when I was thinking about this was, why is Russia so outraged? And they really are outraged when the Russian language is suppressed. So wherever the Soviets have gone, they have made sure that Russian language is spoken. You see it right now in the uh, now occupied Ukrainian, the four oblasts that are occupied by Russia, and they're doing that. They're teaching from their textbooks in Russian, and it's really important that it's in Russian. Okay, so why are they so outraged when Russian language is suppressed? Well, they want control. How do you control? Well, you can control the land, and they definitely want to control the land. There's no question about that. And they want to control or eliminate the people. If they can't control them, control their minds, then they want to eliminate them. They can control their minds only if they can control their thoughts, and if they control their thoughts by using common language, and then what they try to impart through that common language, and that's Russian. So language is a key to thought. Everywhere the Soviets have gone, they've imposed Russian. That's just really an interesting kind of thing. They really have done their best to project that wherever they've gone. And they have fits when the Ukrainians outlawed the language, as if they had just killed a bunch of people. The Ukrainians have outlawed this language. No, the Ukrainians just went back to what was the precondition before you imposed Russian on them. That's all. That's all that they did. It's somewhat like the fits that they have when the Ukrainians are taking down Russian monuments. Oh, they're denying the World War II. No, that's not what they're doing. They're not glorifying the Soviets. Now, this isn't unusual. Like, I can think better about I'm an American. I can think better about America in English because there's just more America in English than there is, say, in Spanish or something else. Now, that doesn't mean I don't know some Spanish. I had a few years of high school Spanish, and I still slaughter the language. And by the way, I sound like a hypocrite when I'm talking about what I'm about to say, which is I'm about to tell you, if you're not Ukrainian, start to try to learn some Ukrainian. And I'll sound like a hypocrite because I slaughter the language. And I thought about this at some length. I could either spend my time, learning more Ukrainian and trying to understand the language and learn the alphabet and that kind of thing, or try to interpret things to you. And I thought, well, while learning the Ukrainian language would be more helpful to me moving forward long term, will be more helpful to you all, is that I spend my time trying to understand what's going on and provide context. So I haven't really done this. I'm not really practicing what I'm preaching here, but I think this is really important, because while I'm terrible and I slaughter the language, I'm trying with every free hour I have to help you understand what's going on in Ukraine. Ultimately, I need to do this myself as well. Okay, so what you can do to defy the Ruski Mir depends on who you are. If you're an American, a European, Western, Australian, whatever, I mean, learning Ukrainian language, I think, is very useful. And it's useful on a couple of levels. It's most useful, well, so first, in 2022, it was the fastest growing language being learned by Duolingo and other things along those lines. People wanted to learn Ukrainian. If you are a businessman, there's going to be a bonanza in Ukraine when this war is over. It's going to be the new place where you want to get in on the ground floor in order in multiple different sectors, because it's going to be rebuilt and it's going to be built back better than whatever it was before. But if you're not a businessman, I understand that that's not necessarily somewhere you want to go, particularly if you're in sectors that aren't going to be involved in Ukraine. But there's going to be a huge growth opportunity there. And so those that can speak Ukrainian are going to have a significant advantage. If you're not a businessman, maybe you're retired, perhaps that's not as useful. But I would still urge you to learn what you can of the language. Anna from Ukraine does a good job with this. She teaches little bits of the language in some of her videos on a regular basis, and you can go back through those. And I think that that's very useful. And it's useful for this purpose. On my birthday, both this year and last year, I went to, intentionally, I went to an Eastern European restaurant that I don't necessarily go to. I've been to once before in my life. And I go there and I order the most Ukrainian thing that I can. And I know it doesn't change anything in Ukraine, but it helps me. It helps me identify more with people that I'm trying to support. And I think learning the language will do that same kind of thing. So I would highly recommend that you do that. If you're a Ukrainian and you're listening to me, uh, help in whatever you can, whatever way you can, connecting businessmen to Ukraine or helping them learn Ukrainian or whatever else to make those kind of connections. I would recommend that as well. Now, if you're Ukrainian, I would argue that you should probably stop speaking Russian. And this isn't a big stretch, and a lot of Ukrainians have already gone down that particular path. And, I've read accounts where professors wouldn't take off any points if you didn't capitalize R in Russian or in Russia when you speak about Russia or Russian. And there was even a law that allowed them to do that legally on legal documents. So stop speaking Russian, and that there's something about doing that is taking a small stand. It's a very small stand, but it's taking a stand. If you're Ukrainian, learn English, learn German, Polish, French, something. Integrate more with a Western mindset and move that way. I think, so I put something out on my community tab yesterday, and I asked, what's the greater threat, NATO or integration into the European Union? One of my viewers made a brilliant comment yesterday. And while most people said NATO 2-1, and I understand the logic and the thinking, integration into the European Union is a huge threat to Russia, because now all systems are no longer Russian leaning. They are integrated into Europe, and the trade with Russia, the interaction with Russia, the thinking about Russia, all of that starts to dissolve or go away, and they become more European. And I think that that is perhaps as large or maybe even larger of a threat to Putin than NATO. I know that sounds weird, and I haven't yet I, I haven't fully thought through this, but I think there's something there that integration into the European Union is a terrible threat to Putin and Russia. Okay, so again, I would, if I were you, if I was Ukrainian, learn what you can about, and it doesn't have to be English. I think you'll get the biggest bang for the buck out of learning English as a world language. In the same way that in the United States, we learn primarily we learn Spanish because we get the biggest bang for the buck out of that from where we are. Um, so yeah, so I would recommend that. Okay, so learn English, German, Polish, French, something. If you're Russian diaspora, if you're from Russia and you're in another country, speak out in whatever capacity that you can. Now, I know that many don't want to. They just want to live their lives. They want to get out. I think, getting out of Russia was a good move, right? But you kind of have an obligation. Now, being Russian isn't evil, but acting in the way that Russians have acted certainly is. And you need to show where you stand in that. If you're Russia Russian in Russia. This is going to be much more difficult, and you're probably not even hearing me if you're a Russian in Russia. If you're a Russian in Ukraine, go home. No, I mean that if you're a soldier, but if you're a Russian in Ukraine and you're a soldier, go home. If you're a Russian in Ukraine, like you got to make a determination. Where are you? And if you really identify with Russia and you want to be Russian, go. And if you really are Ukrainian and you're Russian, born in Ukraine, this is your country. This is who you are. I'm not saying that you can't speak that language. Look, I'm half Irish and half German. My grandfather came here, my great-grandfather came during the potato famine, and my grandfather on my other side came just before World War II, avoided Hitler. I still identify with that, but I'm American. That's who I am. This is where I'm from. This is where I grew up. This is my place. You have to make that same kind of decision as well, but you need to support your country. So, okay, if this helped you, I'd like to know what was useful or what you got out of this. I think there is something about the language, about the use of language that controls thought, that helps you think one way or another. And the Russians are aware of that, and that is why they're so intent on spreading Russian language so that they can spread Russian culture and thinking. I hope that helps and makes sense. Thank you for that. Leave me comments and let me know what you think about this. Thank you for the likes, the shares, the subscribes, the coffees, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.